Welcome to the Authentic Action Podcast, brought to you by Gal Media, Fun Fast Productions, and the Authentic Action School online. I'm your host, Angel, and my intention with the Authentic Action Podcast is to explore diverse perspectives of what it means to live a good life, and to inspire, educate, and motivate you to design and live a life that you love. I will be interviewing and conversing with outstanding creators, artists, activists, actors, teachers, seekers, and speakers who are deliberately designing and living lives they love. We're going to dive deeper into what is holding people back from achieving the lives of their dreams more fully and what their greatest dreams for the future are. I hope the show will inspire you to consider your own mission and dreams, to help you find and voice your own beliefs and boundaries, and perhaps take at least one small step towards realizing your own dreams for our best future. So let's grab our favorite beverages, get comfy, and dive into it. My guest on today's episode of the Authentic Action Podcast is an exceptional visual artist, a successful dance instructor, and an inspiration to many. His passion for painting and for artistry overall is impressive and refreshing. He is well known, well respected, and well loved in his community, currently residing and running a studio in Taos, New Mexico. I'm happy to introduce the eloquent and ever artistic Korál Wynn.
Tell me about your podcast.
Yeah, so thank you for joining me on the Authentic Action Podcast, it's called, and I'm just exploring different people's personal stories of creating a life that you love, a life of your own design, and you fall into that category among the people I know with your dance studio and your painting. And so I'm interested to know a little about whether it's been a struggle or a smooth sailing journey, but kind of how you got to where you are and where you're hoping to go in the future with your creative endeavors. That's the nutshell of it.
So life.
Life,
Just
exactly.
the
Yes.
basket is life.
Life by
Uh,
design, life by your own creative design, kind of taking
so
your own,
the big
driving
basket,
your own bus, and yeah.
well, you can put a bunch of things in it. And when you start out, um, if it's empty, you have your whole future. You try that thing that you're most passionate about, that thing that is the hardest to deny. And maybe that's not how other people do it or how other people figure. But for me, I had two options when I was very young. I could have gone into theater. I was doing a little bit of college theater and doing really very well at it. I did a number of performances,
Mm-hmm.
uh, musical theater and in straight theater. And I loved it. I loved it. I had leading roles in straight theater and had to make a decision. And I've been painting and drawing for my whole life. So uh, I had more, I had covered more ground by the time I was 18 years old, 19 years old, with painting than I had with acting and theater. And acting in theater was more exciting, it was more social, but painting, I figured it was more successful, and it already started to make money. I
Right.
sold my piece out of a show when I was 15 years old.
Was
Uh,
that, sorry to interrupt, but I'm curious, did you have some formal training early on? Was it part of your household, or were you just painting and drawing as long as you can remember, or?
I specifically remember starting to color as a young boy,
Mm-hmm.
about 3 years old. And I remember, working with my brother, who was a couple of years older, and I seemed to be doing very well. I seemed to be doing actually better than the people in my family. And I thought, wow, this is something I could get a sense of significance out of this.
Mm-hmm.
And people like that. People thrive on that, among other things.
Sure.
But okay. by the time I was one of those kids that got into kindergarten a little early because I was born in the end of the year,
Mm-hmm.
younger than everybody else. So I was smaller, and at that age, 10 months makes a big
Mm-hmm.
difference. Um, as far as getting picked for, sports teams and dodgeball and the games and whatnot. I wasn't as fast, wasn't as strong, wasn't as tall. And so this is a silly story. Um, the in kindergarten, I remember sitting at one of the work tables with all of the students, and um, I was able to, at 4 years old, draw a house in 2 point perspective. I may have turned five by that time. It was
Mm-hmm.
somewhere around. And this 2 point perspective where I can see two sides of the house at once. And I remember the house had been hit by lightning. So I had a chimney that was broken. I remember this very specific drawing that I was doing. And when I showed it to the teacher, it was significantly different than what the other kids were doing at that age.
Mm-hmm.
So I sort of identified myself that way. Then there was a period during that year where I was drawing a race car, and I had the other boys in the class were coming up to me and saying, "Oh, can you put big wheels on it, or can you, put exhaust pipes on it? Can you put a spoiler on it?" Even at that age, they knew what a spoiler was.
Yeah.
Uh, and so I'm drawing these things to the best of my ability to imagine them. And the kids were getting really excited around me. And so from that point on, I thought of myself as the artist.
Mm-hmm.
And identity is a very, very big thing. Um, when you identify with an activity, it's easier to excel. When you dabble, or you say, "Well, I'll never be a dancer, I'll never be a footballer, or I'll never, whatever it is,"
Mm-hmm.
then even engaging in that activity, already you've put a limit on yourself. But if you say, for example, "I am a writer," then you take all the limitations off of yourself as a writer, as opposed to saying to yourself, "I'm going to try to write."
Yeah.
And so early on, I had some early success identifying as an artist. And then the teachers would call me the artist, and the kids would call me, and my mom would call me, "Oh, he's the artist in the family." And got a lot of support from mom. Got a lot of support from my stepfather as well. But really, it was my mom.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, who just loved the idea. She still wanted me to go to college and have something to fall back on, which, this, if there's a lesson in this, my personal view on that is that's a bad idea. That um, if somebody can link their identity to an activity, they should absolutely not have anything to fall back on. And the reason being that if you have a plan B in life, you will always default to plan B. There's always going to be a chance that, or always, you'll always see that little escape hatch, that little avenue where when things get hard, and
Mm-hmm.
they will be hard. So, so for me, by the time I was 17 years old, I, um, I actually took a job. I got my first job. I quit college and went to work because I tried art school and I was in a community college. And by that time, I didn't want what they wanted to teach. The art schools, and there were other good art schools. I don't want to denigrate all art schools. There were very good art schools. I've seen a lot of good stuff come out of Gage in Seattle. Obviously. Pasadena College of Art and Design, Ringling, some very, very good art schools. But I went to a community college, and it in the beginning wasn't very good. And I had been to did one semester at Southampton College, which later became Long Island University. It was known for fine art. It had a tradition because it was in the Hamptons, which is an art colony
Mm-hmm.
in on Long Island. And my family couldn't afford to continue to send me. I'd gotten a couple of scholarships, but it wasn't a full scholarship to this private school, which back in the day was the astronomical $9,000 a year,
Mm-hmm.
which seemed like a huge sum of money. Now it's half of what a state school might be. But it was a tremendous sum of money when I was growing up, and so we did it for one semester, and then transferred to a community college, and then it wasn't good enough, and I just dropped out and said I can do this by myself with books and museums or whatever. And so I had to get a job because I was not in school. So I got a job at a department store, and within 3 months, this is a very good experience for me. Within 3 months, I realized I was completely wasting my life, and I actually asked to meet with the manager, and I said to him, "Look, um, I'm not suited for this. I mean, obviously, it wasn't difficult work,
Mm-hmm.
but I told them, look, I'm an artist, and this is what I have to do. So I'll give you all the notice that you need, but I'm going to have to let go of this job." And the manager knew me um, through talking to me for those 3 months that I was working there over summer, and and he just looked at me and he agreed with me. It's like, yeah, that's what you need to do. And we sat down, we played a game of chess, and we were at a pizzeria when I met with him. I had a slice of pizza, played a game of chess, which I won, and I was very, very happy with myself. And then I wound up letting go of the job. He didn't make me work the full 2 weeks. And I made a vow, and the vow was that I would not do anything for money unless it was art. And that was, psychologically cutting off all other possibilities. This is what I was going to do.
Yeah.
Now, any sort of art, but I was always looking to art for the solution to whatever problem presented itself in life. And
For
when
me, that begs the question, did you have a real definitive parameter of what is art that qualifies, or is that just like an internal feeling that you know it when you see it, or
that's a great question, and that question is something that uh, did fall into my plate years later. But for me, I was painting and drawing.
Mhm.
That was pretty much it.
Right.
Photography, I could because photography was part of it. I would shoot reference photos with my little 35 millimeter camera, and then I would draw them like the illustrators,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and that was my process. Um, but I would do signs for businesses, sign painting. I would do, and then eventually I said, you know what? I need to step up. I need to stop doing signs because signs didn't allow me to express fine art. But I had studied advertising art and design.
Mm-hmm.
Went to a bunch of different places. I went to SUNY Farmingdale for advertising art and design. I went to uh, CW Post for half a semester. I don't even think I finished it because I couldn't come up with the money.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I went to the Art Students League, and that was great. That wasn't an accredited college, but it was a very good atelier program. And I was able to meet some wonderful and famous artists who had done it, with these stellar careers. They were like art gods, and they were in New York and they were working, um, and also young artists who wound up going on to wonderful careers. Um, and so I was learning, but mm, I was always expressing. There was always this thing. I'd wake up in the morning, pretty much every morning, and one of my thoughts would include, "What am I going to paint today? What am I going to draw today?"
Hmm.
Uh, and I loved the illustrators. I still do. I later started collecting books with this idea of um, having a beautiful collection of Scribners or um, Colliers or any of the old, if I could find something with Maxfield Parrish or N.C. Wyeth or Norman Rockwell, um, the illustrations made the value of the book for me, you
Mm-hmm.
know. And so parameters. In the beginning, I associated a certain amount of success with getting paid.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would do portraits of my fellow students or their girlfriends for $50 a portrait. I would do illustrations of their dreams. I would do illustrations or designs for um, T-shirts for the clubs on campus. I would And eventually, I took a physics class, and I loved it. It was an introduction to physics, and I was very proud of myself. I got the highest grade in school, and it was all. Um, I didn't go into physics, which was one of those life paths that I would have liked to have done. I
Mm-hmm.
don't think I was any sort of a mathematical genius, which probably would have helped in physics. I would have been more of a Michael Faraday type, but I did very, very well in my first physics class, and the physics teacher actually saw my sketches and doodles in the class and turned around and asked me if I would do a painting of his daughters. And I think it was at the time the highest price commission that I'd ever gotten. I was, I think, 18 years old, and it was $250
Mm-hmm.
um, for this painting of his daughters. And I thought, okay, I can do this. And it probably wasn't very good because I was just starting out. I was studying physics. Probably should have been studying art. Um, but uh, but that led to another portrait and another portrait, and then a portrait of somebody's show horse, and then a portrait of somebody's dog, and then a painting of somebody's house. And then all of a sudden, my prices went from $250 to $350 to $450 to, and eventually, I realized that I could do this.
Mm-hmm.
That I was not. That it was just a question of how much I wanted to work because there were always people out there. And I the thing about not going to art school, which was very interesting, was I did not get indoctrinated into the idea that I had to do something that followed the tradition of abstract expressionism or modern art, whatever the art teachers in the 70s were um, sort of brainwashed into believing was the future.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they would denigrate the idea of illustration and drawing and whatnot in the art schools, in the art classes that I took. Um, and I thought, well, that doesn't make any sense. I didn't come here to have you teach me how to think like an artist. I came here for you to teach me things that I need to find out as an artist.
Right.
Like
Some craft skills and those sort of things, right?
skills, things that
Yeah.
I should look for that if I'm painting figures, and I found more of that, I think, in the Art Students League than I did in the colleges.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually, I got a degree in philosophy, but it took a very long time of dropping in and out of school for a long time. And so, yeah, so eventually I wound up going down to Tampa. My parents had moved. I started moving back and forth to France for, at first it was a summer program, and then I went back for for a season, and I wound up painting with a group of landscape painters that people call plein air painters, but they call themselves just painters. It's
Mm-hmm.
like French fries in France, just fries.
Yeah.
Um, but they would meet up in the north of France and in all the different places where the Impressionists would paint. In
Mm-hmm.
Pontoise, in Auvers-sur-Oise, in Meudon, and just all of these different places that you can find Pissarro and Van Gogh, or Van Gogh, as they say. The paintings were interesting because I brought my New York illustrator style to a group of Impressionist painters. They didn't really know quite what to do with me,
Yeah.
but it allowed me to learn to speak French. It allowed me to get my work into some little galleries out there, although the galleries were never really my main avenue, because I would typically sell direct to people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I learned a lot, and I met some wonderful painters, really, really good painters who went on to enjoy stellar careers. And I got to go to the museums. And so all of a sudden, I'm doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And question, you asked a question earlier. Was it difficult? I don't know exactly how you put it, but I was always running out of money. Always. I mean, there was never a point where I wasn't in the process of running out of money. And I was in my 30s before I uh, let go of the idea that $100 to my name was enough to make a new start. If that makes any sense. I mean, it
Mm-hmm.
sounds ridiculous now, but yeah, $100 was what I used to call fighting cash, and
Yeah.
all I had to do was sell one print, and I was off and running again. Even if I would get down to zero.
Right.
So, uh, and all the way up until that time, into my early 30s, when I wound up moving back to Paris when I was 29, uh, so that I could spend my 30th birthday there. So I wanted to live there, getting a beautiful studio in the center of the city.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and uh, the transition from being a young man of 18, 19, 20, 21 years old, traveling back and forth from New York to Paris and painting with these guys. Uh, then coming back at 29, 30 years old. Um, this is 10 years
Mm-hmm.
of difference, of growth, of doing it, of figuring out what a series was, figuring out what my style was, figuring out what my technique was, figuring out where I was going to live 90% of the time during those 10 years. 100% of the time during those 10 years, I lived in my studio. I It was just a thing. Waking up, sometimes in a one room to let. I would go rent a bedroom in a house and put a folding table with an easel on it on one side of the room, and have the bed on the other side of the room and a bag of clothes either in the closet or on the floor. And that was it. That was all I needed. I would wake up in the morning, I'd look at the painting, and I would work on it. and I would work on it whenever I was awake. And then I would go out and explore the town and get some ideas and see real live people. And then come back and work more. And until I fell asleep. And then I would just go from the studio, from the easel to the bed, wake up, be right at the easel, and the painting was usually the first thing I'd see in the morning. And that worked for me. And it certainly didn't, it wasn't conducive to family life
Right.
or anything like that. But it got me through an entire decade of some of what would have been normally the most difficult years. And they became uh, wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Really. And eventually, I had, I won't go into this a longer story about how I got back to Paris, but there was a fortuitous windfall from a series of paintings that I wound up selling, and all of a sudden, I had, instead of just having $900 in my pocket and a one-way ticket to Paris, I wound up with $20,000 in my pocket and a one-way ticket to Paris, and no home. And so I wound up, instead of just going to do my next painting, I wound up signing a 3-year lease and getting a much more fancy place in the middle of the city than I had originally imagined, and just committed to it, just
Mm-hmm.
threw myself into it. And again, with this no looking back, never questioning, is this the right thing for me, or should I do something else for money, or it was just forward, forward, forward,
Mm-hmm.
and I think so much of that was predicated upon the the vow I made to myself at 17 to do nothing but art.
Yeah.
So, and then the second part of your question is what were the parameters of that? When I was 32 years old, I had come back from France. I had gotten a commission in Tennessee to do a portrait that led to more paintings. And then once there, I was back and forth to Pensacola, Florida, um, where I got other commissions and wound up. This is sort of funny. One of my customers or collectors, and who wound up becoming a very, very dear friend, um, was a musical director, and she appealed to that very latent part of my brain that loved theater, musical theater,
Mm-hmm.
and she had come down to Florida and audition for the play Pippin. I had done Pippin when I was in high school and loved it. I had the part of Lewis, which was I had just a couple of singing lines, but at least I had a character name, and that was good.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it was a comic role, and so she knew from previous conversations that I had done this play and loved it, and I had done a painting of the theme, what I considered the theme, this 3 foot by 6 foot canvas, of this play,
Mm-hmm.
which they recently redid, and it's on Broadway with Cirque du Soleil style dancers and whatnot. Um, and so I wound up moving down to Florida although I had a commission for when I got there, um, but the goal was to audition for her play. And the college at the time, University of West Florida, wound up doing the play at the same time that she wanted to do it privately with her theater company, and so it just never happened.
Hmm.
So there was no audition, and I wound up in Florida anyway. The reason I'm telling this story is because once in Florida, I wound up getting position where I was an artist in residence with a gallery. I was working with a new gallery down there. They had plenty of space. They let me use the space as a studio. I rented a little house in one of the historical districts, and I was driving back and forth from the gallery to the house every day.
Mm-hmm.
And at one point, I I noticed that passing by a dance studio every day, and I said to myself, one day I'm going to go in there and take dance lessons. I loved to dance, but I was always faking it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, my first audition, where I faked a soft shoe to take me out to the ball game, just spontaneously started shuffling my feet, and it was probably so funny that they gave me the part. This is ridiculous. And I faked it and I faked it and I faked it until I was 32 years old. And I said, okay, by golly, I'm going into this dance studio. And I did. I pulled over to the side of the road, went in, and asked if they had Paso Doble classes. They didn't, but they offered me a rumba class.
Uh-huh.
And a wonderful, beautiful instructor. And of course, I wanted to take rumba classes every day. And within 4 months, I was fortunate enough to get into an instructor training class and start training with that studio. It was a little mom and pop shop, not competitive.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very easy to, kind of get to the point where I was good enough to teach, the the young and old couples how
Mm-hmm.
to dance socially, do the little foxtrot around the floor. And within a year, I was teaching, and and within 3 years, I was the top instructor at that studio. And I compromised, but I didn't really compromise because at the time I was using dancers as my models,
Uh-huh.
and I just wanted to be around dancers, and I wanted to know it was a study of my subject,
Yeah.
and it was sort of a lateral shift. And eventually, I had to reconcile myself with the idea that dancing was art and I could do it for money. But
Mm-hmm.
money was never the goal of ballroom dance. I just did it so I could be around dancers and dance and enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
And and I found that I loved teaching as well. Um, I loved helping people unravel the big knot that is the information about ballroom dance,
Mm-hmm.
um, and because it's a lot of information, tremendous amount of information. There's a book of I think the 20 most difficult tests in America, and one of them is the LSAT, and another is the Mensa entry examination. And one of the 20 most difficult tests in America, according to this book, was the Fred Astaire dance instructor certification test, because it's just a dizzyingly large amount of information to convey and to remember.
Right.
And so I liked helping people do that. And I still do. Not
That's cool.
very often. I teach one class a week at this point, but there was a period over the next, over the next 20 years, where my activity as a ballroom instructor would go to full time, and I find myself on the dance floor 40 hours a week,
Hmm.
Which was I don't know. I was still stunned that I could do it and have that much fun and have somebody actually pay me to
Right.
do that. It was nearly always enjoyable.
That's cool. So just now, like the time between when I asked you about what would qualify as art when you were younger to this part of the story really has me super aware that you seem to be really good at that artistic expression. So there's the skill level part of something which you're also really good at, and you certainly put in, your diligent hours early on for painting and drawing, and then with dancing, and then with teaching, and I don't know what else, but it strikes me that whatever that like magic dust is, that's the difference between having a skill set and really having that artistic magic, the thing that only you can, that each of us can only have as an individual, that you seem really good at bringing yourself to your skill set, which I think is why I was drawn to talk to you about about your process. Anyway.
I think the common factor um, is that I love to learn. And so there was a certain passion when I was a very young man painting,
Hmm.
because everything that I started to paint, I was learning how to do it. I was learning human anatomy. I was learning portraiture. I was learning color theory. I was learning uh, structure and rendering and atmospheric perspective and linear perspective and all these different things that you needed to do. And every time I would try it, I would learn a little something and get better and then do it again. And that was addictive.
Yeah.
I don't know. Dopamine rush, I don't know what it
Hmm.
is. Um, there was something very similar about learning ballroom dance. And I have students, I taught a class last night, and I have to pinch myself and remind myself of what it's like, um, because sometimes I forget. But years ago, I didn't forget because I was much closer to it. That when you're standing there on a ballroom floor and you don't know anything, you need permission to move your foot forward or to the side. You need permission, you need confirmation and reassurance to put your weight on that foot. You kind of like dipping your little toe in the water.
Hmm.
People are scared and they need help, they need a guide. And I forget how scary it is. I really do. And sometimes I forget because I'm so excited to help people get to the good stuff
Hmm.
of ballroom and Latin dancing that I sometimes forget that the good stuff is when you don't know anything. And even taking that one step is like, oh, I'm allowed to do that.
Yeah.
With thing, it, I was alone all the time with the work. There was never anybody really holding my hand. I went to, different art classes, um, but I remember very, very little of it. What I do remember was me in the middle of the night wrestling with a canvas, trying to get that beautiful stroke or that beautiful coat of color. And when I would get it, it was like music. It would resonate. Um, and so the learning is the common thread through both forms of art. And going into the third part of my life right now, I'll give you a little segue. When I first moved to New Orleans, I went to visit a friend of a family friend who later became a friend, whom I met at one of my mother's dinner parties. And this young gal was about my age, and she had come into Tampa to visit her mom, and we wound up sitting next to each other at a dinner table. And by the end of the evening, we had um, hit it off enough that she invited me to come to New Orleans and check it out. And she lived in this amazing 9-bedroom house uptown that, as it turned out, was the house of a famous author, John William Farrington. Um, who you, John and Joyce Horrington, as a writing team, you may know from Battle of the Planet of the Apes,
Okay. Yeah.
or Bees. Now, I had no idea who these people were. All I knew was I was going to visit my friend in this ridiculously large house, and I effectively discovered New Orleans, but I also discovered a writing culture. Eventually, I found a little studio, which was an attic apartment in the French Quarter, right behind the cathedral, on the corner of Royal and St. Peter. And out my window, I could see the studio of Tennessee Williams. So his apartment was across from my apartment. I'm thinking, okay, I'm just surrounded by writers. And initially, for the first 3 months I was there, I didn't really have a studio. I was painting in different bedrooms. I was trying to sketch on the streets. And so I spent a lot of time in coffee houses. And uh, and so with my sketchbook, I started sketching, but then I started writing about my state of mind and my experience and just kind of describing what was around me. And that year, I was there from 1989 to 1991. And during that time, I left the city a couple of times to make money. To do some printing, which I did in Tampa. So I was back and forth. But during that time, I wound up spending more time in coffee houses writing than I did painting.
Hmm.
And writing actually became part of my creative process,
Right.
almost where I couldn't paint unless I wrote about it first. And I would paint until I got to a stopping point,
Hmm.
and then I would go right my way through the gap. Look at the painting, write about it, figure it out on paper, come up with a plan, and then go execute those changes on the canvas.
Interesting.
So now, here going into the third act of my life, if you don't mind the metaphor, I feel like writing is going to take a much larger role. It's
Mm-hmm.
going to play a much larger role in my life moving forward. So yeah, and I'm getting older, so the idea of being a world Latin champion is well, it was never really on the table, but uh, I'll teach dance for myself, and I'll teach it when people want to learn something that I have to share.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not a priority. It's something that I just happen to have. That information is something that I just happen to have. And my identity that we were talking about earlier, um, at one point, about 7 years into my dance story, I actually started thinking of myself as a dancer. I moved from Florida to Denver for to try out a professional partnership. Partnership didn't work out, but I was at a point where I felt like I was a dancer and as well as a painter. I never stopped painting, so I was doing both of them, and it was a beautiful marriage of being social and physical versus being contemplative, sedentary, and isolated. And I could thrive in both at
Mm-hmm.
the same time. Um, Now, 13 years later, I don't I don't have that. It's like it's something that I did. It's something that I own. But when I look into the future, I don't I don't really have that much in the way of dance goals anymore. Um,
Hmm.
I became as good a dancer as better actually than I had originally wanted to be. When I first dropped into the studio, I did like much more than I had ever originally intended. So I'm satisfied about that.
Hmm.
But I can only be satisfied about it when my identity is aligned with painting.
Hmm. So you feel like dance and maybe even writing loop back to, like, do you see your expressive self, that identity, as still a painter first and foremost when you think about yourself as an artist? Or is yourself as an artist now expanding into a painter, a dancer, a writer, and whatever else may evolve
Well,
into your.
there's sort of a holistic idea of it, or holographic idea, if you will,
Mhm.
um, that all of these things will make up the my identity as I project into the future, looking back on my life.
Mhm.
A lot of what I think writing does for us, we stitch together a narrative, and
Yeah.
all these different experiences, and all of the traveling in Paris and New Orleans and Denver and Seattle and London and all these different places that you wind up going and having these amazing unanticipated experiences. You have to do something with them. And writing really helps to stitch them together. You
Mhm.
can't. I mean, I know a painter who painted about his summer vacation on a, what was it, like a 9 foot by 12 foot canvas or something. It's not really what I want to do. Um, but writing is great for that. So I started this journal thing. I think my first journal was 1985, and then by '87 I had a girlfriend when I was studying philosophy at La Sorbonne, who was in all of my classes, and she gave me my first Clairefontaine journal. It was like a little notebook with this beautiful smooth paper, and 5 lines per sentence, and just, I mean, very very nice. And she said you should write in this rather than just writing in these little composition notebooks. Treat your writing better. And so I wound up writing in those. And even though we didn't stay together for a very, very long time, I think for the next 2 years, every time I would finish a journal, magically in the mail, another one would appear from France. I mean, she knew to the day
Hmm.
when I was going. And so all of these little journals started to pile up. And when I finally got to Taos, and I had come back from London. I was traveling back to Seattle on the way to consolidate my stuff so I could go back to London and do a second project, because the first project that I had embarked upon was so successful for me. It was perfect experience. But I found this studio in Taos, and I fell in love with the studio. It's right in the middle of the town. What I think, I haven't seen a studio that's better than mine. Um, and so eventually I went back to Seattle, got all my stuff out of storage, and eventually took all of these journals that had accumulated over a period of, gosh, what is this, 35 years now.
Mhm.
And so about 30 years at the time. I've been in Taos for almost 5 years. And I put them all on a shelf. And then I took out a measuring tape and I measured them. So I have 10 linear feet at the time. 10 linear feet, it's probably 11 now,
Wow.
maybe 12,
Yeah.
um, of journals on a shelf. And I calculated that I had exceeded 20,000 pages of journal writing,
Mhm.
which incidentally was the estimated number of pages that Da Vinci had written. Originally, only 7,000 were recovered.
Hmm.
Uh, And I thought, oh my gosh, this is a whole life. There's 2 5-foot shelves plus a couple of boxes, and I started binding them myself, and they're piling up. And I thought, this is just an incredible amount of writing for somebody who's not a writer, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And and I at one point started to edit them, meaning I wanted to transcribe them, put them on disc or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and because they're all handwritten, so I started doing that, and I got through the first one that probably took 2 weeks to write originally and a month to edit,
Yeah.
and then it wound up becoming more pages and more volume because I would annotate the sketches, and then I would have to scan it so there's the sketches and the text
Mm.
were together, and then all of a sudden I realized that I could never do that because I won't live long enough to both read and transcribe everything that I've written,
Yeah.
which is sort of bizarre. And it became very apparent to me that stitching together my personal narrative was important.
Cool. Hey, I don't want to run out of time, and I have an appointment coming up in like less than 15 minutes.
Oh my God.
So I know I could hear your story for another hour, and I would like to continue some more of that.
Well,
But before we get running out of time, I want to ask you if you found a genie in a bottle today and you got one wish with regards to your writing, both the past writing and future writing, what would you want for your I was going to say like for your identity, that artist self. So maybe I want to phrase it as for your identity through your writing, like how you would, best case scenario, wish with no limitations, want your writing to become part of your identity story.
I'm not sure I understand the question, but what, like, if I had a birthday wish and or
Yeah, a
to find
birthday wish or a magic. I know you don't believe in fairies, so I was trying to put the genie in the bottle spin on it. But if you could have one wish with no limitations or parameters with regards to your writing and your artist self, what would that be?
um, the wish is always the same: time.
Yeah,
It's always time,
more
you
time,
know.
huh?
Um, and life has a way of um, forcing you to take a break, whether it's health or family or um, whatever. Uh, and so I realized that it will take a lot of time to write about my my story,
Mm-hmm.
um, and still continue to live the story. I don't think that I'm not that old. I'm not young anymore, but I'm not that old. So there is a third act
Mm-hmm.
coming. Hopefully, knock on wood.
Yeah.
Uh, but the third act is always going to be dependent upon the character development. What I have done will determine what I'm willing to do by reaction or by continuation. Um, and I mean, I would love to have the time to read those journals.
Mm-hmm.
Um, my mom passed away just a little over a year ago, and I don't know that I believe in inheriting traits. Um, but my mother did write, and she did keep journals, and she left them to me. And I have 7 banker's boxes filled with composition notebooks and bound journals. I mean, filled, like packed.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't counted them, but I believe it's over 200. And that's her life, and she wanted me to read through them. And um, I certainly will, and I've read a few pages, um, but it's a tremendous amount of time to bear witness to someone's life
Mm-hmm.
and into their head. It's just time. So yeah, I want time to dance and time to paint and time to write, and really, this is where I need to be in life. Meaning, I have the studio where I can both dance. You know, I had a dream to have a studio. The dream I wrote down in 2000, and 15 years later, I had the studio in a commercial space that was large enough to teach dance in the middle of the showroom and still have 7 rooms with different stations that opened onto the main room. I wrote it down. 15 years later, I have it.
Mm-hmm.
Got a woodworking station, a digital design station, print station, a writing station, a library with 3,000 volumes. Um, I just want time in that. That's that's the
Yeah.
thing. Just let it last until the expression can finally come out. Um, in an hour, I'll go back to the studio and meet with a model who will work with me on a particular painting idea that I've had in mind for a very long time. Um, and tomorrow I'll have another model possibly to work on a different painting.
Mm-hmm.
And last night I had my little Latin dance class, and who knows, Saturday or Sunday maybe I'll just spend the whole day writing.
Yeah.
But I think to kind of sum it up, um, I've been painting as my primary activity and dancing, but mostly painting. Um, really since 1989, been uh, doing that, you know, filing taxes, as it were, and keeping books
Mm-hmm.
and get a little career. Um, and the idea of the suffering those days, there were some years when I didn't even bother to file because I'd made so little money. It was ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
And all of that suffering, all of the sacrifices of the family, the living in the same room that you paint in, the just all sorts of things that you give up or just don't pursue. You don't necessarily give them up because you don't have them to let them go. You
Mm-hmm.
just don't do it,
Right.
and you live without it because it's okay because that's not your goal. All of that really was in the service of arriving in a place where I can finally do all the things that I've wanted to do. And I can do them all here and I can do them all now. And so that's really the goal, for me
You've
in some
arrived, right?
in a little way
Yeah.
that's and so the idea is like, how long can this last?
Yeah.
Because life is ups and downs, and if I'm up, then the next place to go may be down. So I want to just make the up last as long
Right.
as I can.
Stay, keep on the wave as long as possible, huh?
Right, right. and also to do paintings that are progressively more meaningful.
Yeah.
Uh, to take the time where I'm not so worried about um, selling a painting, um, that I would let the potential sale influence the meaning of the painting. That's what I want now for the artwork is that I just look at the paintings that need to be done.
Mm-hmm.
There's a small thought that I had going into this last project that I just started last week. And the title of the painting, I'll share it with you because I don't always title my paintings before I do them.
Mm-hmm.
Once in a blue moon, but this one will be entitled "Waltzing Between Love and Death."
Hmm.
The idea being that when we reach a point in our life that we start calculating how much time we can count on,
Mm-hmm.
barring the unforeseen, we want to start planning that time out as a resource.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to make sure that I can do the paintings that need to be done before that time runs out. That's really what my focus is.
Yeah. That's beautiful. That gives me a sense that you feel like you have some unique storytelling to do through your painting that only you are uniquely qualified to do, which I think is true of all of us in a way, but it's beautiful to see that in action in you. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Thanks for, it's always a privilege to get a chance to tell a little part of your story.
Yeah. So let's wrap up with just a quick fun question that I like to ask. If you're game, unless there's something else I should ask you first, if there's anything else that you want to say before we get to a last fun question.
No, what's the fun question?
If you were a hat, what kind of hat would you be?
If I were a hat,
Indeed.
hmm, if I were a hat, that's just an interesting question.
I know.
Put on my writer's cap.
All right. You'd be a writer's cap.
Well, okay. If I were a hat, I would be a newsboy cap.
I'm trying to picture what that looks like. It's
Uh,
not a ball cap exactly, is it?
no, it's I don't know the term for it, but if you it's like a hat with a brim and it comes forward, kind of just sloops over the brim.
Okay, yeah, I think I'm picturing it now. Mm-hmm.
Newsboy cap.
Yeah.
Um, and I believe the reason for that, I can come up with a reason for it, but that's the first one that came to
Yeah.
mind.
No,
And years ago, I used to shave my head entirely. I did that for on and off for 7 years, and I would wear this black leather casquette,
uh-huh.
and and I think the idea of a newsboy cap is fantastic because you're sitting on the head of someone young who is witnessing great events,
Nice.
and that's what I want to be.
Cool. I like it. That wraps up my interview with the thoughtful and talented Korál Wynn. I can honestly say I was so inspired by his story that I've started drawing again after years of putting it away, and already I'm pleasantly surprised by how it has improved my mindset. Even though I have decades or perhaps even lifetimes of improvement to grow into before my skill level will be at the level of Korál's, I am personally fascinated by that feeling of flow which happens when we feel like we're creating art or telling our own story through whatever medium we're working through or on, seemingly somewhat regardless of skill level or talent. That said, if you want to see a beautifully stirring example of what can come from the combination of exceptional skill and exceptional flow, or collaboration with the universe, as I like to call it, I encourage you to find Korál online and check out his paintings and prints. You will not be disappointed. In particular, Korál suggested that you check out his oil painting Luna Serena. I'll put the link down below in the description. You can also find him on Facebook with a quick search for his name. I do hope I get to interview Korál again, as there were several topics that came up in this conversation that I would love to dive more deeply into. I appreciate your attention today, and I welcome your questions, comments, and suggestions. You can find me on Facebook as well, or you can contact me through most other social media platforms. Also, you can purchase my books and music on Amazon, my t-shirts on Teespring, and you can find my courses, artwork, and information about my current projects at www.angellily.com. You can also learn more about the Authentic Action School online at www.authentiactionschool.com. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to play every day and drive forward.